So we can look at how crowded a population is, and some species do okay being crowded shoulder to shoulder. Many species don't. Many species have real specific needs for space and for resources. This is the most common thing that you guys think of when I say, how would you sample a population? And you want to say, well, I can count how many people are in a couple classrooms, figure out how many classrooms there are, and that'll give me an estimate. That's a pretty common use of density, is as an estimating tool, looking at how many individuals you have per acre, how many individuals you have per square foot, per square mile, and then from the total land area that you want to look at, getting an idea of how many there are total. Works really well on non-mobile species like trees and plants. Not quite the same with mobile species because, well, they move by definition. This is a little bit more important. This is dispersion, and that's how something is spread out in their area. So it's not just how many of them there are per unit area, but how they're arranged in essence. And actually, we have a... Oh, no, we don't. They're gone. Oh, never mind. Thought we had an example. I was going to invite you all to the windows. No, they're gone. So it's also known as spatial distribution, and it's the spatial distribution of individuals in a population. So there are three basic dispersion patterns we look at: clumped, even, and random. And when organisms are clumped, they cluster together. When they're even, you can figure that out. We'll do these in a second. And random means there's absolutely no pattern. So we'll go out in the hall a little bit and we'll do clumped, even, and random dispersion patterns. This school of fish, if you had to take a guess, what would you say it was? Clumped. Yeah. They're all sort of fin to fin with one another. Clumped distribution. Very often when an animal is clumped, it means that their food source is clumped and that they clump around the food source or the water source. Can also be a result of social behavior. So in animals, they call it gregarious. Gregarious means that you like to be part of a crowd of your kind. So we talk about people who are gregarious. People who are gregarious are the life of the party. They've always got a circle of friends around them. They're always enjoying other humans' company. People who are solitary, not so much. They're the ones who are off for a walk by themselves. So very often social behavior, gregarious behavior, will result in clumped distribution. And animals that form flocks, that's considered a form of clumped distribution. So herds and packs and flocks, that all leads to clumped distribution. Name me an animal that you would expect to have clumped distribution based on that. And pull it, if you can, pull it from the list of animals you researched. Nobody?
Big.
No, actually not terribly big. They tend to live in...
I mean, like, size.
No, actually. They tend to live in pairs or small family units. So you'll typically have a mated pair, and then you'll typically have their offspring. So you might have like 3 or 4. You're thinking of the other canid who lives in a large group. We'll talk more about that canid. That'd be the wolf. We don't have them here. But coyotes tend to live in small groups, but it's still a group behavior. There was another, I'm looking at you, Cassandra. The bobcat is solitary, notoriously solitary to the point where the only time bobcats see other bobcats is to make more bobcats. They don't move in groups. Now the mothers care for their young for a period of time, but then there comes a point where even they're like, go away. Did anybody here have the beaver? Who had? Okay. And beavers live in what kind of group? Yeah, family groups, and typically juvenile beavers stay with their parents for 1 or 2 seasons. So very often in a single lodge, and the lodge is the home structure, not the dam. The dam holds back water. Inside that lodge, you'll have a pair of parents, so that's 2. You'll have last year's kits, which is anywhere from 2 to 4 individuals. And then you have this year's kits, which is anywhere from 2 to 4 individuals. And I think they very commonly have little litters of like 3 and 4. So that can be, what, 8 to 10 individuals living in a lodge. And this is, who has a 60-pound dog at home? Who can visualize a 60-pound dog pretty easily? A lab. Like a pretty stocky little lab, a pit bull, about 50, 60 pounds. Beavers are 60-pound animals. And their lodges are like a small bedroom. They're like 8 foot by 8 foot. Can you imagine living in that space all winter with 7 of your relatives? I can't. There's some interesting social adaptations beavers have because of that winter behavior. So anyway, clumped distribution very often comes from either resources that are clumped or social stuff. You know, I like hanging out with other coyotes. I like hanging out with other cedar waxwings or a bird that are notoriously gregarious. Okay, next. Even distribution. Also, very often results from social interaction. Here's the thing to remember. You can have a positive social interaction. Ooh, let's all hang out together. You can have a negative social interaction, which is, get away from me. So even distributions very often are the result of a social interaction, but not necessarily a positive one. You see this, so this is I mean, here we have, they're evenly distributed as they're flying. We've got Canada geese. But you can also see in nests, there are some ground nesting birds that will build their nests, and they will not get their nest within so many feet of another nest. And they end up arranging themselves perfectly so that their nests are all basically equidistant. And what you end up with is a very even distribution. And you can find a picture online, and I'll have you guys do that a little bit later, of even distributions. And the last one is the most unusual. This is random distribution. So you remember we talked about random mating, and what kind of organisms did we say did random mating? Plants, where you have like wind-blown pollen. Random distribution is also really only common in plants. The one other place that you see random distributions is marine animals that are blown by ocean currents, that are just kind of moved by currents, like jellyfish, especially baby jellies, don't distribute themselves. They are moved by ocean currents. And so they end up where they end up. They don't have a whole lot of say in it. So typically this is, wind dispersion. Plants also get bird dispersed. When I used to do, when I worked at Pymatuning as a naturalist, one of my programs was called Feeding Wild. It was something like wildlife habitat in your backyard. And it was basically like how you can make more wildlife habitat when you go home from here. You like seeing the animals here. How can you bring some of that home? And one of my favorite suggestions was always, if you hang up sort of a perch line, put some bird feeders here and here, and you string a line between the two. Birds will come and sit on that line, and while they're sitting on that line, they will poop. And under that line, you will get the most amazing variety of fruit-bearing bushes. You'll get raspberries, you'll get poison ivy, you'll get your gray dogwood and your red osier dogwood. You'll get anything that produces berries that birds like to eat will grow under that line. Now that's not random. You're directing, hey, birds, sit here. But, they poop in flight. So you'll get random dispersion of plant species by birds or by wind, and again, the marine species also. Yes, sir?
You know what happy I saw?
Okay, so you'll go online, you'll find 3 pictures. circle what shows the distribution and write the forces that cause that distribution. And Dylan, oops.